Now, our purpose is to make this hurt them. They stole my property, and I'm going to make that the most expensive 1965 Chevrolet automobile that the city of Boise ever stole, or that this particular officer Jones ever stole, or that these two towing companies ever stole. But in order for me to do that, I've got to take them to court, and I've ultimately got to win. So, the way this comes down is that 1965 Chevrolet actually belonged to a friend of mine named Kenny Chase. Now, Kenny lives at 2414 Pawtucket Drive in Providence, Rhode Island, and I have his power of attorney. Now, in Idaho and Mississippi, a man is whoever he says he is. Now, whatever state you live in, the question of aliases will come under a criminal title or a criminal statute if you're using it to defraud. So you need to be careful that you're not using it to defraud. But you know, John Wayne wasn't John Wayne, and most of the people like O. Henry, you know, was someone else, and Mark Twain, you know, was someone else. All right, so if you're going to go in on a civil action offensively, remember that you're liable to pay all the court costs and attorney's fees should you lose. So here's my $3,000 worth of merchandise, and they want $3,800 from one lawyer, and the other lawyer will be about $4,000. So we're going to talk about close to $10,000, and that's my punishment. Now, in order to avoid that punishment, I'm a pauper. I don't own anything. I don't own any cars. I don't own any houses. I don't own anything. And take a look in your state, take a look in your locality, and find out what the law is pursuant to judgments. When you have a judgment against you, or when you go into bankruptcy, there's a certain amount of things that you can keep. Like you can keep your kitchen stove and refrigerator and the clothes on your back and one car if it's, you know, worth no more than so many dollars and on down the line. If you have assets, that is bank accounts, credit cards, automobiles, homes, houses, furs, etc., do not go into the courts offensively, because you're going to get hurt, and you're going to get hurt bad. Because first of all, you're a layman. It's probably the first time you've ever done a case, at least an offensive case. And if you don't know how to use the money issue, and you don't know how to defend yourself on criminal matters first, you may lose, and if you lose, then you'll get burned for $10,000, and the sheriff will come out and put a lien on your house and take your Mercedes away from you, or whatever you got. All right? So let's be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and let's use our heads. Get rid of the assets that you have. And you can do that in a number of ways, so today I'm going to tell you three ways you can do that. Number one, let's say that there's 10 citizens in your area, and the 10 of you are interested in doing some courtroom strategy procedures and a Title 42 suit. All right, so you want to file an affidavit of poverty, but you don't want to own any assets. Now remember, the affidavit of poverty isn't necessarily talking about assets, that is, goods and physical chattels. It's talking about the money issue. You're a pauper because you don't have any dollars and cents, or you don't have any silver or gold with which to pay your debts. You can only tender debt, and you can't pay your debt at law. That's your contention with this affidavit of poverty. You get rid of whatever you want by just selling it. And here's a chance for you to use the registration. Let's say you got a Mercedes or whatever it is, and you want to keep driving it, but you don't want to risk losing it. So what you do is you sell it to an alias, or you sell it to a friend, or you sell it to a daughter or a father, or whatever, whoever you want to sell it to, and then you just drive their car. That's the way that works. For instance, I'm driving a car right now, and it's owned and registered to, let's call him Sam Smedley. All right, so I'm just driving Sam's car. That's all it boils down to. And the car's registered. It's got license plates on it and the whole 9 yards. You can't take that car away from me. It's not mine. It belongs to Sam Smedley. All right? Now, when you're asked the question, and this is going to happen because they're going to haul you into the court, and then they're going to have a question and answer session, and they'll be able to do this under the rules of civil procedure. The exact name of the action slips my mind right at the moment, but let's just call it, for the sake of argument, an inquisition. They're going to haul you into this inquisition, and they're going to make you answer some questions. And when you answer those questions, You want to be able to answer them truthfully because you're going to be under oath, or at least you're going to be under the penalties of perjury. Now, you asked me the question, Mr. Gordon, do you own a 1972 Pontiac on a bill? No. Do you know who owns that car? Yeah, Sam Smedley. And how long has Mr. Smedley owned this car? Oh, he's owned it for about a year. And where is Mr. Smedley now? I don't know. I haven't talked to Sam for quite a long time. And this goes on and on, you know. And no matter what they ask, real property, same thing. Do you own a certain piece of property? Well, here's where your grammar lesson comes in. What do you mean by the word own? Well, who owns the house that you live in? Bank of Idaho. Bank of Idaho. And are you buying the house? No. Do you rent the house? Yes. Well, who do you rent the house from? Sam Smedley. Oh, and who is this mysterious Sam Smedley? It's a friend of mine. Where does he live? 2414 Pawtucket Drive, Providence, Rhode Island, or wherever. And that's the way you handle that. Now, if you want to get down nitty gritty, you can sit there and talk to an attorney. You can have things called living trusts. I've talked to some people that have trusts and they don't have any assets. It's a shame that we have to do this, but you got to remember that you're playing a game here, and these guys play for keeps. And the lawyers in ancient times, you know, used to oppress orphans and steal widows' houses. Today we're still oppressing the orphans, but we call it probate now when we steal widows' houses. To give you an illustration of this so that you can understand how property can move from person to person to person without your government knowing anything about it, and that's the way you ought to set things up. I have a neighbor across the street, and her and her husband were retired. He was a mechanic all of his life, and I don't think that between the two of them, with their trailer house and their lot and their 2 cars and all their furniture, they've got $30,000 in inflated assets of 1983 Federal Reserve notes. I just don't think they've got over that or that much. Well, Roy died the other day. And the funeral cost the lady $1,200, and of course that was $1,200 that they didn't have because they're on Social Security, and this lady works in a nursing home part-time so as to make just enough but not over the amount to affect their Social Security. I mean, that's the way a lot of people live. And Roy died, and so they went out and buried him, and when they got all through, remember, Roy had a will and left everything to his wife. And it was recorded, and of course the lawyer took, let's see if I understand this, the lawyer took $1,200, and the state of Idaho wanted $3,200 for a total of $4,400. This poor woman was penalized, she was punished, she was taxed, she was fined $4,400 because her husband died. She hasn't got $4,400. She'll have to mortgage the trailer and her property in order to come up with the $4,400. And if she doesn't, that lawyer and the state are going to put liens on her property, and then ultimately when she dies, they'll take that away. Now watch how this could have been handled so much more simply. The property is recorded, isn't it? If the property is recorded in the name of Roy or, use the word or, not and, Joanne Schmedley. When Roy dies, who cares? Joanne Schmedley just signs the deed or acts in any capacity that she wants to act. How about the cars? Have your cars registered or not registered at all, and the title should read, in my case, I don't own any cars, and I don't own any houses, and I don't own anything, so I don't have to worry about this. Whatever it is that I have, since I don't own anything and nothing is registered with my government, when I die, who cares? Whoever has physical possession of it is the new owner. That's the way that ought to come down. But you surely ought to be able to put your property together in such a way that you don't have a will. You know, these lawyers, what do you hear on television constantly? Oh, you should have a will. You know, you've just got to have a will. Well, why? Well, you've got to have a will so that the lawyer can enter this case into probate so that they can take about 1/3 of your estate from you. Why don't we use our heads a little bit, and why don't we plan our own property, and why don't we plan our own death and plan our own will so that we can, after we're dead, the property goes to whoever you want it to go to. Why don't you sign it into their name ahead of time? You know, you're my oldest son, and I want you to have this, and so I'm just going to give it to you right now, and I'm just going to keep this title to it, and when I die, you just go over here and pick it up from Mom, and everybody knows and understands that the Mercedes goes to the oldest boy, and you register it in the oldest boy's name, and you hope that the oldest boy doesn't get a lien put on him in some way and have the car taken. Always make sure that when you have liens that are threatening or you have lawsuits that are threatening, you move the property into somebody else's name. Get rid of it. That's what I'm telling you. Get rid of your property. You know, I live in a house, and I drive a car, and I eat 3 squares a day. I do everything that everybody else does, but I own absolutely nothing. I don't own a thing. Well, I'll take that back. This watch here, that's mine. I own that. That's total allodial freehold, and that's a Timex, $15. And I own this shirt, and I own this tie, and there's some things that I own, and it is those types of things that cannot be taken. Now, we have the right to property, and we ought not to be taxed on that property. You heard Neelis and Bob run through the scenario here on the property tax, and one of these days we'll put a tape out on this property tax, because all land in the United States is owned by our sovereign master, the state. The state owns it, and you just have an equitable interest in it, and you're allowed, as a serf on the land, to live there as long as you pay the tax. That is the rent to the county or the state. Now, you understand that at this point in time. Until you can get that property moved off the tax rolls, until you can get that property owned free and clear, you better pay the tax on it. And you'd better know how to handle yourself in the courtroom before you put that property at risk. So I'm not suggesting that you run down now and take your property off the property tax rolls and try to take on the federal government or your county government or something else with insufficient knowledge. That's a little more advanced type of work, or a little more advanced type of courtroom work that you'll get into after you finish this course and after you've been through the traffic court 3 or 4 times and after you know and you clearly understand how that courtroom strategy and procedure works, how to write motions and how to file motions and how to argue motions and briefs and affidavits. And as we move along now, we're at about the halfway point in this course. As we move along into the second half, and we're going to get into the technical aspects of here's the way you write the motion, here's the way you do this, and here's the way you do that, and here's the way you file the paper. Now, when we're talking about property then, property we know is something that's allodial and that we have an absolute right to. And I don't have any fear whatsoever of winning my car and my motorcycle back. I'm convinced that between here and the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., that I'm going to get my car and my motorcycle back. But in the meantime, it's a long, slow, drawn-out process. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to do everything in my power to make this as expensive for the city of Boise and everybody that's involved in it as I possibly can. Now, they've got a judgment here, or they may get a judgment for $3,800. So what? You got a judgment and you can't collect on it. Joe Louis was in that boat. They had a judgment for $1 million in taxes. And he died and he never paid the $1 million in taxes because he didn't have it. I hope poor old Joe had the $1 million salted away in Krugerrands. Now, talking about property, there was something that came up at today's executive board meeting, and I want to pass this along to you in this lesson so that you know and understand something about money and property. The government has total and absolute control over your bank accounts, credit cards, and over your income, and they know where your house is, they know where your cars are registered. Why do you suppose your government wants your car registered and your house recorded and your bank accounts with numbers in them, etc.? It's so that if at any time they want to, the massa can come down and scoff up your property. A man came in here the other day and he's talking about taxes. And I asked him, well, how clean are you? And you know, that's a strange term, you know, for a novice. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, do you have any credit cards? Do you have any bank accounts, savings accounts? Do you have any stocks and bonds and things like that? And he said, well, yes, I do. I said, well, get rid of them. He came in with an income tax problem, and, you know, he's afraid the government's going to come in and take his property away from him. And he came in today. And I said, well, how's it going? And he said, well, not so good. You know, that bank account, before I could get down and close it out, they leaned it and they took everything out of it. Oh, I understand that, because that bank is a corporation. It's owned by the state, and they claim you owe the money, so now you can sue them to get it back. Here's what you do. Oh, and there's one other thing. Let me warn you about another thing here. I just got word that the federal government is going to call in all the $100 bills. And people that have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in $100 bills are going to have 10 days to turn them in. And anybody that turns in more than $5,000 worth, I think is what somebody reported today, they were going to report the guy, and then they're going to start levying taxes. And then there was a guy who got in an auto accident the other day. Another fellow reported today, and he had $25,000 cash in his car, and so they took $12,000 of it on the assumption that the taxes weren't paid on the $25,000, so they just stole $12,000 from it. And that's the way it is. Our government is just literally going out stealing our property, and now they're passing legislation and law with which to steal more and more property under the color of law. All right. What you need to do then, your common sense ought to start telling you, if you've got any $100 bills or you keep a lot of cash around, why don't you move it into silver and gold? And then take the silver and gold and dig a hole and bury it. Then only you know where it is. And you can always convert it back to $20 bills. You know, if I had $100,000 in $100 bills, I'd want to unload them on a friend of mine who's in the gold and the silver business and let him put them back in the bank. And let me have the Kruger rands and the 10th rands and the silver and the junk coin. And let me dig a hole, or let me stash it in my basement, or let me hide it somewhere. And then when you need $100 or $200 or something like that, you just take it back to the guy and you say, here's the silver, here's the gold, now give me some Federal Reserve notes so I can go pay my rent or whatever it is you want to do. Because you're going to find that your money is going to be stolen from you. If you've got money in the bank, friend, that money is the property of the government, and you have an equitable interest in it, and they'll let you keep it just as long as they want to, and then when they don't want you to have it anymore, they'll just take it away from you. And they can do that, and they can do it legally because, you see, you only have an equitable interest in your bank account. You've given up your property rights. So at law, when you go into the courtroom, you start talking about money in a checking account or in a bank account, let me tell you, friend, you're out to lunch. You don't have property rights in a checking account. You've got equitable rights in a checking account. And the bank has the property right. And property is what you have protected under the Constitution. Your equity rights are protected in admiralty jurisdiction, and the captain, remember, is the Lord Master Sovereign. He'll determine how much you get or don't get when you're on board his ship. So, when we're talking about protecting our property, then, we're talking about our lives. You know, after all, when you're working, you're talking about converting your life into property. And when your life is converted into property, and then the government comes along and takes your property, whether it's through inflation or whether it's through outright theft, through taxes, or whether they just come out here and hold curbstone court with Officer Smedley or somebody out here taking your car or your motorcycle for safekeeping. You're talking about them taking your life from you. And you've worked hard for whatever it is that you've got, and your Constitution guarantees you the right to keep it. But you know, there isn't a person in 100,000, maybe one person in 100,000 who can take on those curbstone courts and go into a Title 42, Section 1983 suit and gain that loss back. If there's more than 1 in 100,000, then we're making progress. If there's 1 in 100,000, I just guess that that's probably about nationwide all the people that you're going to find going into the federal district courts suing these government agents for the theft of our property. Now, until you can get to that level, then you need to protect your property, and it's as simple as ABC. What I'm talking about here at the end of this lesson on property isn't something that's hard to do. All of the people that I know, my closest associates, they don't own a thing. I can talk to my closest friends. They don't own the cars they drive. They don't own the houses they live in. They don't own anything. And they don't have any bank accounts. They don't have any credit cards. Most of them don't carry wallets, and they don't need to, because after all, a man who carries a wallet is evidently a man who has amnesia regularly, because he has to look in his wallet and take a look at his picture ID to find out who he is. I don't need to. My attention span is a little longer than the average ant, so I can remember who I am, and I can go downtown, and I don't need picture ID. Some people do. If you're one of those, well, then I guess you have to keep a wallet. Maybe the bank has to keep your money for you because you can't keep it yourself and you can't count. I mean, after all, I couldn't count until I was 37, and I fired my accountant, and I had to learn to count myself. So if you've got cash, securities, stocks, bonds, anything like that, remember, every stock you've got can be confiscated by your government. If you want to take the risk and it doesn't bother you, well, then just keep the stocks and the bonds and buy, sell, and trade and pay your tax and do whatever you want to do. But if you're not paying the tax and if you're, left out there, so to speak, hanging out on the end of the limb, you better get back a little closer to the trunk of the tree. And the trunk of the tree, when you're talking about property, is you'd better have that property under your control that no one else can control. And when a guy's got 100,000 in Krugerrands and only he knows where they're buried, I say you're in control of your destiny, you're in control of your property, you're in control of your wealth. If you're living in a house and you've got it 90% paid for and you lose your job and you can't make the payments, your government or your bank, which is just an extension of your government, is going to take it away from you. Why don't you get out of it? Why don't you get it paid off so that you own it free and clear, and then only pay the property tax, and then when you get a little more knowledge into your belt, then you take and stop paying the property tax and move your property from equity to law in a low-deal freehold. And we'll show you how to do that at a later time. That's not going to be a part of this course per se, but by the time you get to the end of this course, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what we're doing and how to apply it and how to do it and how to go into the court to argue your position and how to always save your property on the courthouse steps. You can always save your property whenever you're going to take on a tax case and you want to challenge the tax law. Always leave an out so that when you get to the courthouse and the sheriff is about to auction off your house, you've got a friend over here that's bidding it back in. And if you haven't prepared for that, then don't do it. We don't like to recommend to people that they go jumping into the 30-foot end of the pool. And this is what we find with so many people that come through the doors here at the school, and that's this. A guy will come in here and he stopped paying his income tax 3 years ago and he got rid of his checking and his credit cards and he thinks he's on top of everything. He couldn't argue a parking ticket and win it. But here he is about to go into the federal district court for willful failure to file an income tax evasion or some other heavy federal felony, which I liken to dumping a guy into the 30-foot deep end of the pool after you've sat there for 5 minutes and told him how to swim. He sinks right to the bottom. Okay? Wouldn't it be better if you went down to the 3-foot end first and let me throw you in down there so that if you sink to the bottom you can stand up? And then after you've learned to swim back and forth at the 3-foot end, then you can go down to the 30-foot end and swim back and forth. That's what we're recommending that people do. But that isn't what most people that we're dealing with, and I'd say probably 90% of the students that come in here, they've already got a DWI. They have already got a tax liability. They've already encountered or enveloped themselves in the wrath of the government. Now here they are in a court action, oftentimes for some pretty heavy felonies and pretty heavy penalties, and they've never been in a court. They couldn't write a motion. They couldn't argue their way out of a paper bag if it was soaked. And we don't want people to get into that kind of trouble. What we want to do is to teach you what to do and how to do it long before you ever get into the courts. So don't go and run out there and throw your driver's license away and the license plates on your Rolls Royce and then start driving around on the streets, because they're going to nail you and try to lay you away. And if they seize your car, then part of the punishment, this is the way they punish you, is they take your car and tow it away and make you pay $150. See, after they've done that about 3 or 4 times to you, then you start to get the message, the intimidation, the terror. It's cost you $100 4 times, that's $400, and you could have registered the car for $80. That's the way they do it. You see, you can keep paying them the blackmail at $40 a shot, and it's always cheaper than to demand your rights. And that's why citizens are afraid to demand their rights. We were talking at today's executive meeting, and we said that gun control is one of the goals that our government is attempting to reach. Listen, gun control is already a fact of life in the United States. Yeah, that's right. Gun control is already a fact. It's been a fact for years. How many people do you see walking up and down the street with a gun? None. And the reason is that they're all afraid to carry guns, aren't they? So gun control has already been instilled in the minds of the people. They've got them on their shelves up in their closets. But they don't carry those guns on them, and they don't wear them openly. It'd be like prohibiting pens. I mean, if the government came down on people, they wouldn't carry pens either. They'd keep their pens an inalienable right to keep a gun, and an inalienable right to keep a pen, you'd keep that pen up on the shelf in your closet. And so here's a valuable property right that's been taken away from you. Failure to exercise your rights waives your rights. Well, failure to wear the guns, Americans have then by de facto legislation, by de facto government intimidation, just allowed the government then to preclude you from wearing a gun. Most people wear guns concealed, and I'd certainly recommend and suggest that every woman in America carry a .25 in her purse, and that'll eliminate rape. But then when you shoot the rapist, they're going to charge you with first-degree murder, and here you are, the victim or the potential victim, being prosecuted then for carrying a gun, using a gun in the commission of a felony, and murder one, and then some lawyer will come along and say, well, sweetheart, you should plead guilty to at least manslaughter and then go to jail for 1 year and come back out and be on probation for the next 10 years. That's the way our legal profession and legal system is working now. Now, what we need to do is to change that, and we can change that, and we've changed it in Ada County, and you can change it wherever you are. But you've got to cost them money. You cannot allow them, that is, your government agents, to cost you money. Now, I've got a bill for $3,810, and they've got my car and my motorcycle, and I'll leave it up to you to decide how much my car and motorcycle is worth. But I'll tell you this, they're not going to get the $3,810. And when the next bill for another $3,000 comes in, they're not going to get that $3,000 either. And I'm telling you, friend, that's the most expensive 1965 Chevrolet that they ever stole. And they haven't even got started well on it yet, because I'm going to appeal this to my district court, and then to my appeals court, and then to my state Supreme Court, and then to the Supreme Court in Washington. And it's probably going to cost me another $1,000, would be my guess. I'm probably going to have to put out 1,000 Federal Reserve notes, and when I do, I'm going to see to it, or I'm going to do everything in my power to see to it, that this city pays about $60,000 to get this case to Washington, D.C. I want that 65 Chevrolet to be a very expensive car. Now, I'll tell you how this has been coming down in our county. They're not stealing people's cars. And when you tell them in Ada County, Idaho, I want to know what your probable cause is, and I demand a lawyer, or I demand a counsel of my choice at the scene of the crime here before I make any statements, and I demand all of my rights at all times, the very next thing when they go to call for a wrecker is, who wants the wrecker? That's right. They want to know who wants that wrecker and who's going to pay that bill. I might have lost the battle in the court, but when it comes to the battle of the pocketbook, George Gordon won that case. Now, I'll show you something else. The city took on the job of defending the policeman. So the insurance company then is really the person who's responsible for the debt. Somebody's going to have to pay this law firm for $3,800. Well, if they can't collect it from me, who can they collect it from? Well, they can't collect it from the policeman because the jury said, gee, it's not his fault. Well, then who's going to pay the bill? Well, the city's not going to pay it because they're insured, aren't they? What that means then is that the insurance company is going to pay the $3,800, doesn't it? How many of these $3,800 bills do you think that insurance company wants to pay? You know, somebody told me that my car was really only worth $100, and I said, you know, I don't believe that for a minute. I think my car is worth $1,500 because it was a classic. But you know, I have another car that I'm driving now, and it's a 1967 Chevrolet, and it's got a tremendous amount of sentimental value, and it's a real classic also. It has a few dents in it here and there, but those can be taken out. And it's true that the engine's got 180,000 miles on it, but it's also true that that engine can be rebuilt. Somebody told me the other day that that car was only worth $100, and I said, I don't believe that for a minute. I really think it's worth $500. And I'm planning to restore that 1967 black two-door Chevrolet, and it's got a radio in it that doesn't work, but someday that radio can be fixed. And it's got a heater in it, and the heater works. It makes a little noise because I think the bearings are wore out on it, but I think that it can be fixed also. And it's true that the paint's a little faded on the car, and some of the chrome pieces are missing, but I'm contending that it can be painted, and I'm contending that the chrome can be put back on it. And it's got wore-out tires on it, and I'm contending that those tires can be replaced with new ones. Somebody told me my 1967 Chevrolet automobile, that's the one I drive now that doesn't have license plates on it, would be a classic for the police to take for safekeeping again. And I said, well, I really don't think that the police will take any of George Gordon's cars for safekeeping, but in the event that they do, I'm convinced that I can put more 1967 black Chevrolets on the road at $100 a piece than they can defend for $3,000, $5,000, $7,000, or $9,000 on the courtroom floor. Now, I'm contending that the people who handled this case would have been money ahead had they gone in, done a good job, and lost, because if they'd have done that, they could have collected their attorney's fees from the officer, couldn't they? Because after all, he's working and he's got a home that he's paying for and a couple of cars that he's making payments on, and he's got a job. I'm unemployed. As I've said before, I used to run a company down the street here, and I employed 40 people and produced $1 million a year and paid $200,000, or about 20% of that in taxes. Today, I employ no one, and I produce nothing. And I have no income, and I don't pay any taxes. And I'm out here busily teaching you and everybody else how to do the same thing. And in order to make this government hurt, make them bleed like a stuck pig, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put those valuable $5, $10, $1,500 cars on the road. And those cars are classics, and those cars are important to me, and those cars are my allodial freehold property, and I'll argue that case to the U.S. Supreme Court because, after all, when I'm working on a court case, I'm unemployed anyway, so while my time is probably worth $60 an hour in the event that I win, my time really isn't worth a heck of a lot. When you stop and analyze it, I'm unemployed anyway, so I'm really not losing a great deal. Now, for those of you who are employed, maybe it might cost you a little bit more. But for those of us that are unemployed and those of us that are out here doing our jobs, that is our job trying to regain our property rights and our freedoms back, I think that my government is going to spend a whole lot more money and a whole lot more time and effort keeping me in poverty than I'm going to spend in time, effort, and energy trying to, or accomplishing paying them any taxes. You know, messing with me, to my way of thinking, in the last 5 years has cost this government about $1 million. And if you were to add up the number of people that I've educated to stop paying their taxes, it could amount to another million or two. And by the time I'm finished, you know, my government messing with me 5 years ago and trying to put me in jail is going to be one of the most expensive and costly blunders that any bureaucrat ever made upon a citizen of the United States. Because I work at this full time, and I'm teaching other people how to work at it full time. And I'm teaching people just like you how to stop paying taxes and how to stop paying that probate. And I'm telling you, if you got a will, tear it up. And if it's recorded, have it unrecorded. Anytime a lawyer tells you to do something, it's designed to make the legal profession a profit. And like that poor lady across the street who's been fined $4,400 as a penalty for her husband dying, I say that's a crime. Nothing has changed from the time of Jesus. These bloodsuckers are still out here stealing widows' houses, and they're going to have that widow's house. But they're going to have that widow's house because of her ignorance. Now remember, and I'll tell you this case, we've read it 2 or 3 times, but I don't want you to forget this. Take your legal quotations book out and turn over here to this case called U.S. versus Minker. Now here's this poor lady across the street from me. And because of what appears to be a lawful command on the surface, now doesn't it appear to be a lawful need and command that you have a will and that you have your property recorded and that you have your automobiles registered? Doesn't that appear to be the law, and doesn't that appear to be necessary and normal in a well-regulated society? Many citizens, because of their respect for what only appears to be a law, and this lady just respects the law and she'll just do whatever she's told, and she saw on television that she should have a will, and so her and her husband drew up a will. These people are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights due to ignorance. I like that line. That comes from the United States Supreme Court. You know, those boys in Washington aren't dumb. And the way I figure, if they're smart enough to write lines like that, I ought to be smart enough to listen to words of wisdom like that. So, the moral to the story is then, when it comes to physical chattel property, that is automobiles and farms and cows and dogs and chickens and pigs and whatever it is you have, If you have an equitable interest in it of 10% and the bank owns 90%, you don't have a worry in the world, because if they take it in the morning, they're doing you a favor. But if you have an equitable interest of 90% and the bank owns 10%, then what you need to do is to get rid of it. And get rid of it for your own good. And if you've got a mortgage on your house, or you've got a will written somewhere, and that mortgage or that will is in your name and someone else's, so that it requires 2 signatures, you need to make some changes. There might be a good place for you to go see a lawyer if you're not competent or capable or able to do it yourself. I'd say by the time you get to the end of this course, you ought to be able to read and write. I mean, after all, that's all I'm going to teach you how to do is read and write and count. And once you get to that point in time, you'll be able to take care of your own property. All right, now, just to recapitulate then, you have to make it cost them money. If it doesn't cost them money, then you're not doing your job right. If you own anything, they're going to take it away from you, and it'll be a long, hard battle getting it back. See, it's easier for you to hang on to it than it is to get it back from them. All right, when you go into a lawsuit then, do not own any property in your own name, because if you do and you lose, they'll get a lien against the property and take it away from you. If I weren't judgment proof, they not only would steal my car and my motorcycle, they'd charge me $4,000 to do it. In this case, they got the car and the motorcycle, but the $3,800 is going to make it very expensive, isn't it? And they haven't got to the end of that row yet, because by the time we get to Washington, I estimate they're going to spend about $60,000, and I haven't got all the bills. I think this bill is going to be about $10,000. And they'll get the judgment against me, but just like Joe Louis, they're not going to collect it. Now, you need to have your property in the name, then, of someone else. It can be a pseudonym, or it can be your sons or daughters or mothers and dads or whoever you want. But shift the property around. When you're going to make a suit against someone else, make sure that you don't have any way that you can be hit or attached. And don't take the license plates off of your Ferrari. Take the license plates off of your more valuable classic automobiles, the 1967 Chevrolets that have ball tires. Those are the cars that you can afford to let your government steal, and then you can go into the courts and litigate. All right, I guess with that then, we've taken a look at property and the rights to property, and we know what our constitutional rights are, and now we've showed you the value of property and what the Constitution and the Supreme Court has said about property and what Bouvier says about property. And now I hope that now I've given you the practical application of how to guard and protect that property. And of course I realize there are probably hundreds of questions, that people will come up with. Well, what do I do with this and how do I handle that? Should I get a trust or shouldn't I have a trust, and one thing and another. I'm not pushing trusts and I'm not knocking trusts. And I'm not pushing pseudonyms and I'm not knocking pseudonyms. You'll have to decide for yourself what's best for you. And after all, isn't that what freedom's all about? All I'm trying to do is show you what to do for yourself. Make up your own mind. Think for yourself. You can decide what's best for you. You don't need me and you don't need government. Just be aware that gold and silver coin in your basement that you have 100% total control over is better than $100,000 in Federal Reserve notes that can be called in, or better than $100,000 in the bank that can be confiscated, or $100,000 in taxes, in stocks and bonds that can be taxed right out of existence. Property is your life, and if you don't protect your property, your government is not going to protect your life for you.